there are children who skip childhood entirely. Not because they are rushed through it, but because they are forced to live outside of it, assigned roles that belong to adults, burdened with responsibilities that exceed their developmental capacity. Their hands too small to hold the weight they are asked to carry. They learn to suppress the parts of themselves that are soft, curious, playful, and needy. They learn to organize their lives around someone else's needs. They become the caregiver, the mediator, the support system, the strength, before they have even learned what it means to be cared for. And when they grow older, something quiet and profound goes missing: the memory of ever being a child at all. They became adults before they ever had the chance to simply be. Chapter 1: The Premature Adult. There are children sitting at dinner tables with shoulders that carry worry that should belong to someone 40 years older. There are children managing the emotional states of adults, monitoring their moods the way a meteorologist monitors storms. There are children who, when asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" realize they are already there. That growing up happened without their permission, without celebration, without the essential pause that allows a person to be a child. This is parentification. It is the moment when the family system breaks down and a child is assigned the role of a parent, a mediator, a confidant, a provider, often without conscious awareness from anyone in the family that this is occurring. The child does not volunteer. The child does not understand that they are taking on something they should never carry. They simply respond to the shape of the void and they fill it with themselves. A parentified child might be cooking meals when siblings are still young, might be managing finances, paying bills, navigating the adult world of bureaucracy and responsibility before they can drive, before they can vote, before they even know who they are. Or the parentification might be emotional. The child becomes the person a parent confides in, the one who holds their secrets, the one who comforts them when they cry, the one who bears the weight of their inner world. The parentified child learns to read rooms, to sense danger before it arrives, to adjust their own behavior to manage someone else's emotional weather. If a parent is depressed, the child becomes quiet, hoping that not demanding anything might lighten the darkness. If a parent is volatile, the child becomes hypervigilant, calculating how to move through the world without triggering anger. If a parent is absent, the child becomes self-sufficient, not by choice, but by necessity. On the surface, these children often appear exceptional. They are praised for being so mature for their age. They are told they are such a help and so responsible. Teachers notice their seriousness, their focus, their lack of age-appropriate silliness. Adults mistake maturity for strength and never recognize it as a symptom of deprivation. The child, desperate for validation and approval, accepts these compliments as evidence that they are doing something right, something valuable, something that makes them worthy of existence. But beneath the surface, the child is experiencing something closer to erasure. Their own needs have become irrelevant. Their preferences do not matter. They cannot afford to be needy, to be vulnerable, to be uncertain. They cannot cry because crying requires comfort, and there is no one to provide it. They cannot play because play requires freedom, and they are bound to duty. They cannot explore the world the way other children do because exploration requires safety. And their world is organized around managing danger and need. The body of a parentified child is a body held tight. The nervous system remains activated, always ready to respond to the needs of others, never relaxing into simple existence. The mind becomes a problem-solving machine, always working, never resting. Sleep becomes difficult because the mind is occupied with worry about others. Hunger goes unnoticed because the child has learned to ignore their own body. The voice, the opinions, the preferences, all of these are suppressed in service of the greater good of keeping the family system intact. There is a peculiar kind of loneliness in this experience. The parentified child is surrounded by people who need them, yet they are profoundly alone. No one is asking how they are feeling. No one is holding space for their fears, their sadness, their confusion. They are useful, but they are not truly seen. They are relied upon, but they are not truly known. And over time, they stop looking for anyone to see them. They organize their entire sense of self around being needed, believing that this is the only way to justify taking up space in the world. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Forced Adulthood. Parentification does not emerge from malice or intentional cruelty, though it can feel that way to the child. It emerges from family systems fractured by circumstance, by illness, by trauma, by the overwhelming weight of living. It emerges when a parent is absent, through work, incarceration, death, or abandonment. It emerges when a parent is emotionally unavailable, consumed by their own depression, their own untreated trauma, their own unresolved pain. It emerges when a parent is struggling with addiction, where the child becomes a stabilizing force in a chaotic system. It emerges when a parent is raising multiple children alone, when there are genuinely not enough hands to meet all the needs. In some families, parentification is instrumental. A child is expected to manage household tasks, cooking, cleaning, laundry, caring for younger siblings. These are concrete responsibilities that the child can observe and complete. On the surface, this might seem less harmful than emotional parentification, yet it still robs the child of the freedom to be a child. It still demands sacrifice of their own development, their education, their play. In other families, parentification is emotional. A parent turns to their child for emotional support, confiding problems, seeking advice, using the child as a confidant in ways that dissolve appropriate boundaries. The child becomes the person who manages the parent's emotional state, who comforts them, who provides the stability that another adult should provide. This form of parentification is particularly damaging because it disrupts the child's ability to develop secure attachment and creates profound enmeshment where the child's identity becomes fused with the parent's emotional well-being. Some families experience both forms simultaneously. The child manages the household while also managing the parent's emotions. They are the caretaker, the confidant, the stable one, the one everyone relies upon. The family system reorganizes itself around the child's capacity to meet needs, and the child learns that their own needs are simply not part of the equation. What is consistent across all forms of parentification is the role reversal. The child moves from the dependent position, where they should be, where they could safely develop and grow, into the caretaking position. The parent moves into a dependent position, relying on the child to meet their needs, to provide stability, to hold the family together. This reversal violates one of the most fundamental principles of healthy development. The children need caregivers to be stronger, wiser, and more resources than themselves. The child does not choose this role. They are too young to understand they have a choice. They are simply responding to the vacuum they perceive. If no one else is going to care for this person, if the family is going to collapse without them, then they will become what is needed. It is a form of survival. It is also a form of profound sacrifice. Parents who parentify their children rarely intend harm. Many are doing the best they can with the resources they have. Many are traumatized themselves, operating from nervous systems that never received the care they needed. Many are unaware that what they are asking of their children is developmentally inappropriate. The parent who confides in their child may believe they are creating intimacy and closeness. The parent who demands household management may believe they are teaching responsibility and competence. Yet the impact on the child is significant, regardless of the parent's intention. The child learns that their value is tied to their utility, that love is conditional on their willingness to sacrifice, that their own needs are less important than someone else's stability, that they cannot be vulnerable, cannot ask for help, cannot simply exist as a child. These lessons become so deeply encoded in the child's sense of self that they persist long into adulthood, shaping the adult's relationships, choices, and ability to ask for what they need. Chapter 3. The Neurobiology of Lost Development. The brain of a parentified child develops in response to chronic stress and constant demand. The amygdala, the threat detection center, becomes hyperactivated, always scanning for problems that need solving, always ready to respond to emergencies. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, planning, and emotional regulation, does not develop as fully as it should because the child's resources are devoted to managing immediate crises rather than higher-order thinking. The hippocampus, which consolidates memories and regulates emotion, actually shrinks in children exposed to chronic stress. This has lasting implications for memory formation, emotional processing, and the ability to distinguish between past danger and present safety. The parentified adult may find that they cannot remember much of their childhood, not because nothing happened, but because the brain was too overwhelmed to encode and store memories properly. Research on developmental trauma, which includes parentification, reveals that the developing brain is profoundly affected by being asked to manage responsibilities that exceed its capacity. Identity formation, which should occur during adolescence, becomes disrupted. The adolescent is so focused on meeting others' needs that they never develop the autonomy to explore who am I, independent of their role as caretaker. The result is a fragmented sense of self, where the adult does not know who they are apart from what they do for others. Attachment security is also disrupted. A secure attachment requires that a child can rely on their caregiver to be the stronger, wiser, more resourced person in the relationship. The parentified child cannot rely on this. Their caregiver is not stronger. They are weak and need support. This creates insecure, often anxious attachment patterns that persist into adulthood, characterized by worry about the relationship, fear of abandonment, and difficulty trusting that others will be there. The nervous system remains in a state of chronic activation. The sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, is constantly engaged. Cortisol, the stress hormone, bathes the developing brain in continuous doses that can impair the growth of neural networks and increase vulnerability to anxiety and depression later in life. The parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response, does not develop properly because there is never a time when the child can truly rest. Cognitive development is also affected. Studies show that children who experience chronic stress have difficulty with executive function, problem solving, and attention regulation. They may struggle in school despite being capable, simply because their nervous system is devoted to managing threat and need rather than absorbing new information. They may have difficulty with impulse control, with planning for the future, with understanding abstract concepts. The development of emotional regulation is particularly disrupted. The parentified child learns to suppress their own emotions in service of stability. They learn to override their body's signals of hunger, tiredness, fear, sadness. This creates a form of emotional dissociation where the adult finds it difficult to identify what they are feeling, to trust their own emotional signals, or to express emotions in healthy ways. The cost of survival becomes the inability to feel. What the neuroscience reveals is that parentification is not simply a family dynamic that a child should get over. It is a form of developmental trauma that alters the structure and function of the developing brain. It is an experience that changes the child's capacity for stress management, emotional regulation, identity formation, and relational security. These changes are not a reflection of the child's weakness or inadequacy. They are the brain's remarkable adaptation to an impossible situation. Chapter 4: The Cost of Carrying Others. The parentified adult is not an adult who came through childhood unscathed and then developed healthy patterns. The parentified adult is someone whose entire sense of self was constructed in response to the needs of others. Their identity is built not around what they want or who they are, but around what they can do for others, how they can be useful, how they can prevent disaster. These adults often experience profound anxiety, not the acute situational anxiety that comes in response to a real threat, but chronic, pervasive anxiety about whether they are doing enough, whether others are okay, whether the structures they have built are holding. They remain hypervigilant, attuned to the subtle shifts in others' moods and needs, always calculating how to adjust their behavior to maintain equilibrium. People-pleasing is endemic. The parentified adult has learned that their value is tied to their usefulness, so they continue to say yes to requests, even when saying no would be more honest and self-protective. They struggle to set boundaries, fearing that asserting their own needs will lead to rejection or abandonment. They may find themselves in relationships where they are giving far more than they receive, and they interpret this imbalance as evidence of love. Codependency patterns often emerge. The parentified adult seeks out relationships that recreate the dynamics of childhood, where they are needed, where they are the stable one, where their own needs are secondary to the needs of another. They may attract partners who are emotionally unstable, struggling with addiction, or otherwise unable to meet their emotional needs. On an unconscious level, this feels safe and familiar. This is what the adult learned about love and connection. The suppression of emotion creates emotional exhaustion. The body keeps score of all the feelings that were not allowed to be felt, all the tears that were held back, all the anger that was swallowed. Over time, this suppression leads to a kind of emotional deadness, where the adult moves through the world without feeling much of anything, or it leads to explosive emotional releases. Suddenly, without warning, the weight becomes too much and the adult collapses or erupts. There is also a profound difficulty with knowing what the child actually wants. When a person's entire developmental period is organized around meeting others' needs, they may never develop the capacity to ask themselves, what do I want? What brings me joy? Who am I? Many parentified adults describe not knowing how to make choices that are purely for themselves, feeling guilty when they do something that doesn't serve someone else, or feeling lost when they are finally free to choose. Shame is often present. Many parentified adults internalize the message that their needs are burdensome, that they should be able to manage on their own, that asking for help is a failure. The shame is compounded by the fact that others often praise them for being mature and responsible. So if they are struggling now, there must be something wrong with them personally, not with the system that demanded too much too early. What is often missed is that these symptoms, the anxiety, the people-pleasing, the codependency, the emotional suppression, are not flaws in the adult. They are scars from a childhood in which the adult was asked to be something they were not developmentally ready to be. They are the evidence of a person who survived the unsurvivable by becoming what was needed. Chapter 5. The exhaustion becomes undeniable. The turning point often comes not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, creeping exhaustion. The parentified adult has been carrying others' burdens for so long that they no longer notice the weight, but the body notices, the nervous system notices. Something begins to break. Perhaps it is a relationship that fails because the adult cannot stop caretaking long enough to be an equal partner. Perhaps it is a panic attack or a breakdown that reveals just how much anxiety has been held in the body. Perhaps it is the moment when they realize they are repeating the parentified patterns with their own children, and the grief of that recognition becomes too much to bear. Sometimes the turning point comes through therapy. A therapist who gently names what happened, who says, "You were a child. You should have been cared for. Instead, you were asked to care for others. It wasn't your job. It wasn't your responsibility, and it has affected you." These words, so simple and obvious, can be revolutionary when they are heard by someone who has spent their entire life believing that this was simply how families work. The recognition brings a complex rush of emotions. There is relief. Finally, someone is naming what happened as wrong, as harmful, as not the child's fault. There is grief. All those moments of lost childhood, the play that never happened, the rest that was never allowed, the needs that went unmet. There is anger at the parents who failed to protect the child's childhood, at the family system that made such demands, at the years wasted on caretaking when the adult should have been learning who they were. Most complex is often a sense of betrayal. The parentified adult must confront the reality that the people who were supposed to protect them instead asked them to protect others. The people who were supposed to be stronger were weaker. The love they received was conditional on their utility. This realization is deeply destabilizing. Yet the turning point, despite its pain, is also the moment when healing becomes possible. As long as the parentified adult believes that this was simply the way things are, change cannot occur. But in the moment of recognition, this happened. It was real. It was not my responsibility. It affected me. A crack appears, and through that crack, the possibility of a different way of being can enter. Chapter 6. Reclaiming the Lost Child Within. Healing from parentification is not about blaming the parents or resolving to be angry. It is about recognizing that a child, the person's own inner child, was not given what every child deserves: safety, play, freedom from responsibility, the unconditional care of adults who are stronger and wiser. Reparenting is the central healing work. This is the practice of becoming, for oneself, the parent one needed, the adult who provides comfort without demanding explanation, who says your needs matter without hesitation, who creates safety and stability not as a transaction but as a gift. Reparenting is not a rejection of one's actual parents. It is an acknowledgement that the emotional needs formed in childhood can now be met by the person themselves as an adult. Inner child work. Visualization, journaling, dialogue with one's younger self helps the parentified adult reconnect with the child who was forced into adulthood too quickly. In a meditation, the adult might visualize themselves as a child and ask, "What did you need? What were you never allowed to have?" The answers are often simple yet profound: to play, to be cared for, to have needs without shame, to be enough just as they were. Writing a letter to one's younger self can be profoundly healing. The adult writes words of validation and reassurance. "I know you had to take care of everyone. I know you had to grow up too fast. I know you thought this was the only way to be loved. You were so brave. But it was not your job, and I am so sorry you had to carry that." Setting boundaries becomes possible when the adult understands that boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary for survival and growth. The parentified adult who struggled to say no to their family's demands can begin to practice, "No, I cannot solve your problem. No, I cannot be your emotional support. No, I cannot sacrifice myself." Each no is an act of reclaiming. Reconnecting with joy and play requires deliberate practice. The parentified adult may need to consciously give themselves permission to do things that serve that exist only for their own pleasure. To draw, to play music, to spend time in nature without worrying about productivity, to laugh without guilt, to rest without fear of being abandoned for not being useful. Therapy. Particularly trauma-informed therapy, inner child work, narrative therapy, or somatic approaches provides the container for this healing. A skilled therapist understands parentification and can help the adult recognize and grieve what was lost, while also celebrating what they survived. The goal of healing is not to become someone who never cares for others. It is to become someone who can care for others from a place of choice and overflow, not from a place of desperation and fear of abandonment. It is to develop a sense of self that exists independent of what the person does for others. Chapter 7. Permission to be unfinished. There is the particular kind of freedom that comes when a parentified adult finally, consciously, gives themselves permission to be a child, not literally, but in the deepest sense. Permission to have needs, permission to ask for help, permission to rest without producing anything, permission to not know, to be uncertain, to be incomplete. For years, the adult was the one holding everything together. Now, in the sacred work of healing, they can begin to let someone or something hold them, to lean on a therapist, a friend, a partner, to say, I cannot do this alone, to receive care without immediately calculating how to repay it. The child who was forced to become an adult too quickly is still in there, in the muscle memory of the body, in the patterns of thought, in the assumptions about love and worth. But healing means that child is no longer alone, no longer unsupported, no longer forced to bear what they should never have carried. This is not about erasing the past or pretending it did not shape them. The parentified adult is still the same person who survived extraordinary circumstances. That survival required resilience, intelligence, and a profound capacity for love. These are gifts, hard-won through suffering, but gifts nonetheless. What healing offers is integration. The fierce protector who kept the child alive can rest now, knowing they are no longer needed for survival. The competent adult who managed households and emotions can relax their grip, knowing the world will not fall apart if they are not always controlling everything. The person themselves, not as a function, not as a role, but simply as a person, can finally, quietly exist. There is a gentleness in this becoming. It is not a dramatic transformation. It is a slow unfurling, like a plant that has been kept in the dark, finally experiencing the light. Some days the old patterns return, the anxiety, the people-pleasing, the compulsive caretaking. But there is now an awareness of these patterns, a choice about them. The parentified child who is now an adult is learning, perhaps for the very first time, what it means to be held. Not as an accessory to someone else's life, not as a function in a family system, but simply as oneself, worthy of care, deserving of rest, allowed to unfold into whatever they might become when no one is asking them to be anything at all. End of script, references, reparenting, seeking healing for your inner child. What is parentification? Signs of a parentified child. Parentification, the role reversal from parent to child, how childhood trauma impacts lifelong brain health. Parentification and adultification, lost childhood and role reversal. Understanding parentification, the effects of abuse and neglect on child development. The effects of a parentified child. Spousification versus parentification. Understanding childhood role reversal. The impact of trauma in childhood on development. Parentification and its relationship with attachment. What happens when parent-child roles reverse? Developmental trauma. Conceptual framework, associated symptoms. Parentification. Vulnerability, reactivity, resilience. Parentification and its long-term effects. Unpacking. Parentification, when the child becomes the parent, childhood trauma therapy for adults. Overcoming trauma, parentification and its impact on resilience. How can adults undo the harm of being parentified as children? Overcome childhood trauma as an adult? What is parentification trauma? Reparenting after trauma. A guide to inner healing. How therapy for adults with childhood trauma heals. Healing codependency. Through inner child work. What is parentification? Signs, impact healing. Understanding parentification. The hidden burden on children. 3 therapy approaches for childhood trauma. Healing from childhood trauma, a guide.